Welcome back to HFY Soundscape, the best channel for HFY sci-fi tales.
They say you can tell how much a civilization fears the dark by how much gold they plaster on their warships. If that was the case, the Solar Empire was absolutely terrified. I stood in the docking bay of the Aurelian Crown, and the sheer opulence of the place made my teeth ache. Massive pillars of white marble, real marble, hauled across light years, supported a ceiling etched with the history of 1,000 conquered worlds. The air didn't smell like a ship. It smelled like lily and expensive perfume, a desperate attempt to mask the ozone and the cold reality of the void outside. I wasn't here for the decor. I was here because the Imperial Guard of the Empress was supposedly the best in the galaxy, and yet they were dying like flies. My name is Kaelen Voss. I don't wear gold. I don't carry a ceremonial spear. I carry scars and a reputation for surviving things that should have turned me into stardust. As I stepped off the transport, the clicking of my heavy combat boots echoed through the hall, a harsh, rhythmic intrusion into the soft hum of the ship's artificial gravity. The guards lined up along the promenade were statues in polished chrome. Their helmets were stylized faces of weeping angels, and their weapons glowed with a soft blue light that looked more like jewelry than a defense system. They looked at me, a man in a worn, charcoal gray tactical rig, with a disdain so thick I could practically taste it. They saw a mercenary, a low-born human from the fringe colonies. They didn't see the man who was about to tell them their entire way of life was a death sentence. "You're late, Terran," a voice rang out, cutting through the silence like a blade. I turned to see a tall, slender woman draped in robes of spunlight. This wasn't the Empress, not yet, but her High Seneschal, Valerius. He looked at me as if I were a stain on an otherwise perfect rug. I didn't apologize. Apologies are for people who intend to do better next time. I was exactly where I needed to be. "The Empress is waiting," Valerius snapped, gesturing toward the Great Hall. "And try to keep your voice down. Holiness requires silence." I almost laughed. Holiness doesn't stop a kinetic slug from piercing your chest. We walked through corridors that felt more like a museum than a military vessel. Every inch of the ship shouted about wealth, but whispered about weakness. They were so focused on the appearance of power that they'd forgotten what actual power felt like. "Hold on before we get into the real stuff, I want to know. What are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments." As we approached the massive heavy doors of the inner sanctum, the tension in the air shifted. It became heavy, charged with a different kind of energy. This wasn't just about a job anymore. I could feel eyes on me, not just the guards, but something else. Something older. Valerius stopped at the final set of doors. "You will enter, you will bow. You will wait for Her Imperial Majesty to acknowledge your presence. And for the love of the stars, Voss, do not touch anything." The doors groaned open, revealing a chamber that defied gravity. Islands of crystalline rock floated in the center, held in place by magnetic tethers. And there, sitting on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single fallen star, was Empress Lyra. She was beautiful, yes, but it was a cold, predatory beauty. She didn't look like a ruler. She looked like a judge. She looked at my rugged gear, my unpolished boots, and the tactical knife strapped to my thigh. Her lip curled in a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of disgust. "Is this him?" she asked, her voice echoing with a psychic weight that pressed against my skull. "Is this the ghost of Jupiter they promised me? He looks underwhelming." I stepped forward, but I didn't bow. I could hear the guards behind me shifting, their energy spears whining as they powered up. One wrong move and I'd be ash. But I wasn't looking at the spears. I was looking at the Empress's neck, where a faint, rhythmic pulsing told me she was nervous. She was hiding something. "I'm not here to look pretty, Your Majesty," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here to make sure you don't end up like the last 3 captains of your guard. If you want a parade, hire a dancer. If you want to live, listen to me." The room went deathly silent. Valerius went pale. The Empress leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into slits. You dare speak of survival to me? Within these walls, I am eternal. Nothing is eternal in a vacuum, I countered. Especially not a palace that's essentially a giant shoot-me sign for the Void Reapers. She stood up, her robes shimmering with agitation. Then prove it. Show my guards what a real warrior looks like. Prepare for the ritual of the first watch. Strip your vanity, Terran. Let us see the man beneath the steel. She wanted me to change into the ceremonial armor of her house. She wanted to humiliate me by making me wear their gilded cage. But she didn't realize that in her world, clothes were a status symbol. In mine, they were just something that got in the way of the truth. I reached for the seals of my tactical vest. The guards stepped closer. The Empress watched with a bored, haughty expression, waiting for the savage to reveal his common skin. I pulled the vest off, then the moisture-wicking undershirt. The air in the room didn't just go silent, it vanished. Empress Lyra, the woman who had seen the birth of suns and the death of empires, took one look at my bare back and froze. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Her hand moved to her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror I hadn't seen in a human or alien in a decade. She wasn't looking at my muscles, she was looking at the ink. And she knew exactly what it meant. The silence was heavy enough to crush a man's lungs. The Empress didn't move, she didn't speak. She just stared at the ink etched into my skin, her fingers trembling against the armrest of her throne. It wasn't a standard military tattoo or a colony brand. It was a sprawling, jagged map of celestial coordinates overlaid with the symbol of the final bastion, a black hole encircled by a broken chain. To most, it looked like abstract art. To the ruling elite of the Solar Empire, it was a ghost story. It was the mark of the Void Walkers, the elite unit that supposedly died 2 centuries ago defending the Soul Gate. They were the men and women who stayed behind when the Empire retreated to the inner systems. The ones left to rot in the dark so the wealthy could live in the light. That's impossible, Lyra whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. The 13th Legion was erased. Every record, every soul. You're a ghost. I'm the consequence of your ancestors' cowardice, I said, my voice low and rasping in the cavernous hall. I didn't care about the protocol anymore. The guards were confused, looking back and forth between their trembling ruler and the half-naked human in the center of the room. They had been trained to fight rebels and pirates, but they had never been taught how to arrest a legend. Valyrius stepped forward, his face a mask of panicked fury. Cover yourself. This is a sacrilege. Guards, seize this. This pretender. Stay back, the Empress screamed. The force of her voice sent a psychic ripple through the air, making the crystal islands above us hum. She descended the stairs of her dais, her movements no longer graceful, but frantic. She stopped just inches from me. The scent of lily was gone, replaced by the metallic tang of her fear. She reached out a hand, her fingers hovering just over the scar tissue that cut through the center of the black hole on my shoulder. How are you alive? The gate was collapsed. No one survives the crushing weight of a collapsing singularity. Humanity is surprisingly stubborn when we're told we aren't allowed to exist, I replied. I could see my reflection in her eyes. I looked like a monster in a cathedral. We didn't die. We just adapted to the dark, and now the things that were chasing us back then, they finally found a way through. The blood left Valyrius' face. The Void Reapers? They're myths. Stories told to keep children from wandering near the outer rim. Tell that to the 3 guard captains you've buried this month, I snapped, turning my head to look at the seneschal. They weren't killed by assassins or political rivals. They were harvested. The Reapers don't want your gold, and they don't care about your throne. They want the one thing this ship has in abundance, concentrated biological energy. Lyra's eyes darted to the tattoo again. If you are truly of the 13th, if you have been living in the between, then you know how to stop them. I know how to kill them, I corrected. But you're not going to like the price. Your guards are useless. This armor you want me to wear? It's a beacon. Every time one of your men powers up a spear, it's like ringing a dinner bell for a predator that can smell fear from 3 sectors away. I reached down and picked up the ceremonial breastplate they had laid out for me. It was beautiful, heavy, and utterly useless. With a single practiced motion, I found the pressure point in the alloy, a flaw hidden by the engraving, and snapped the decorative chest plate in half. The sound of metal screaming and breaking echoed like a gunshot. The guards gasped, a collective intake of breath that signaled their horror. To them, I had just destroyed a holy relic. To me, I had just cleared some trash. The first step to surviving, I said, looking the Empress dead in the eye, is admitting that your gods can't save you. I need full access to the ship's internal sensors, a dampening field for the entire royal deck, and I need every one of these statues to drop their spears and pick up something that actually shoots lead. Lead? Valerius scoffed, regaining some of his arrogance. You want us to use primitive kinetic slugs? We are the pinnacle of tech. You are a buffet. I roared, the sound of my voice vibrating in the crystal above. The Reapers feed on energy. Every time you fire a laser, you're just giving them a dessert. You want to live? We go dark. We go cold. And we go loud. The Empress looked at her guards, then at her broken armor on the floor, and finally back at me. She saw the tattoo, the mark of a man who had seen the end of the universe and didn't blink. She knew the stories. The 13th Legion didn't just fight. They hunted. Do as he says, she commanded, her voice regaining a cold, hard edge. Valerius, give him the codes. If a ghost has come back to protect us, the least we can do is give him the tools to work. I started putting my own gear back on. The holy incense in the air was starting to make me sick. I needed the smell of oil, sweat, and gunpowder. As I strapped my knife back to my thigh, I felt a shudder run through the floorboards. It wasn't the engines. It was a rhythmic, pulsing thud, like a heartbeat coming from the outside of the hull. The lights in the great hall flickered. The soft blue glow of the guards' spears began to pulse, turning a sickly, necrotic purple. They're here, I whispered, drawing my custom kinetic pistol. And they're not waiting for an invitation. The Empress looked toward the massive reinforced windows overlooking the void. For a second, there was nothing. Then, a shadow larger than the ship itself began to blot out the stars. It didn't look like a ship. It looked like a tear in reality, a jagged tooth of obsidian drifting toward us. Lock the doors, I ordered, but it was too late. The air pressure in the room suddenly spiked, and the sound of scratching thousands of tiny metallic claws began to echo from inside the walls. They weren't coming through the doors. They were already inside the vents. The scratching wasn't just metal on metal. It was a sound that vibrated inside your teeth. It was the sound of something hungry. The pristine white marble of the ceiling began to spiderweb with cracks, and a black, oily substance started to leak through the vents, defying gravity by coiling upward. Defensive positions! Valerius shrieked, stumbling backward toward the throne. The Imperial Guards reacted exactly how they had been trained, which was the worst thing they could possibly do. They raised their ceremonial spears, the blue energy humming at a high frequency. To a human, it was a weapon. To a Void Reaper, it was a flare in a dark forest. Power down those spears now, I yelled, but I was drowned out by the first scream. A vent cover exploded. Something blurred, a jagged, multi-limbed shape made of living shadow and cold iron, and slammed into the lead guard. His armor, polished to a mirror finish, didn't offer a second of resistance. The creature's claws pierced the alloy like it was wet paper. But it didn't just kill him, it drank him. The blue glow of his spear was sucked into the creature's chest, turning its translucent ribs a bright, violent neon. The guard didn't even have time to fall. He withered into a husk inside his suit before his boots hit the floor. Fire! The captain of the guard roared, ignoring my warning. A dozen beams of pure light lanced out, illuminating the chamber in a blinding flash. It looked impressive. It looked heroic. It was a massacre. The creature in the center absorbed the hits, growing larger and more solid with every watt of energy they poured into it. It let out a sound like grinding tectonic plates. A laugh. "Idiots," I hissed. I leveled my kinetic pistol, a customized sledgehammer .50 caliber that used chemical propellant, not batteries, no electronics, no energy signature. Just raw, physical force. Thoom. The recoil traveled up my arm, a familiar grounding bite. The heavy slug caught the creature in its glowing chest core. Unlike the energy beams, the physical mass couldn't be absorbed. The creature's chest erupted in a spray of black ichor, and it was thrown backward, crashing into a marble pillar. The silence that followed was brief, punctuated only by the smell of cordite. The guards stared at me, then at the dead monster. They had never seen anything die to a primitive weapon before. "That's how you do it," I said, racking the slide. "Now drop the glow sticks before you bring the whole hive down on us." Empress Lyra was the first to move. She grabbed a ceremonial dagger from her belt, a blade of solid obsidian, and threw it at the feet of her nearest guard. "Listen to the Terran. Kill the lights. All of them." The room plunged into darkness as the guards frantically deactivated their spears. For a moment, we were blind. Then, my HUD flickered to life, powered by a kinetic crank battery in my helmet. The world turned a grainy, high-contrast green. "Voss," the Empress's voice came through the dark, surprisingly steady. "There are more, aren't there?" "The one I just killed was a scout," I said, scanning the ceiling. The green light of my visor picked up dozens of heat signatures, cold spots, actually moving through the ventilation shafts above us. The Hive ship outside is locking onto the Aurelian Crown's main reactor. If they breach the engine room, this ship becomes a giant battery for them, and we're just the packaging. "We have to get to the bridge," Valeria's whimpered. "The emergency shuttles. The shuttles are death traps," I snapped. "The moment you power up an engine, they'll swat you out of the sky. Our only chance is to kill the ship's internal power and fight our way to the manual override in the Armory. I need real guns. I need the stuff you keep in the Forbidden's archives." The Empress moved toward me in the dark, her presence a cold weight. "The Forbidden's Armory is only accessible via my biometric signature. But it's 3 decks down through the servant quarters. The most cramped, dark part of the ship," I muttered. "Perfect. They'll love it there." Suddenly the floor tilted. A massive impact rocked the ship, followed by the distant, muffled sound of hull plates groaning. The Aurelian Crown was being pulled in. The obsidian ship outside had extended docking tendrils, literal claws that were digging into the hull to siphon the atmosphere and the energy. "They're boarding in force," I said, checking my magazine. "Empress, stay behind me. Guards, if you want to live, pick up those display swords on the walls. No energy, just steel. It's going to get messy." As we moved toward the hidden service elevator, the scratching grew into a roar. The walls themselves seemed to be breathing. I could feel the Empress's hand catch the back of my tactical vest. She was terrified, but she was holding it together. "Voss," she whispered as we entered the narrow, dark lift. "The tattoo. You're from the 13th. That means you know the truth about the Great Retreat, don't you? You know why we left you behind." I looked at her through the green glow of my visor. "I know that while you were building marble palaces and gold-plated ships, my people were learning how to bleed in the dark. You didn't just leave us behind, Lyra. You used us as a shield." The lift jolted, then began to plummet. Not a controlled descent, a free fall. Something had cut the cables. "Brace!" I yelled, grabbing the Empress and slamming her against the back wall just as we hit the emergency brakes. The doors didn't open. They were torn open from the outside. A dozen glowing eyes peered in from the dark of the lower decks. The Reapers weren't waiting for us to find the Armory. They had been waiting for the Empress to come to them. The elevator car groaned, wedged at a precarious angle between decks. Through the jagged gap where the doors used to be, the lower corridor looked like a nightmare. Gone was the white marble and the smell of Lillet. This was the guts of the ship low ceilings, exposed conduits, and a thick, choking fog caused by a ruptured coolant line. And in that fog, the eyes were waiting. "Stay down," I barked, shoving the Empress toward the corner of the lift. I didn't wait for the creatures to make the first move. I leaned out of the gap and unleashed the sledgehammer. Thum, thum. The muzzle flashes were blinding in the cramped space. Each slug carried enough kinetic energy to stop a charge-in bull, and at this range, the Void Reapers were being torn apart. Black ichor sprayed across the bulkheads as the heavy rounds shattered their crystalline carapaces. But for every one I dropped, 2 more skittered out of the shadows. They moved with a sickening, liquid grace, defying the ship's artificial gravity by sprinting along the ceiling. "Valeria's, the manual release." I shouted over the screeching of the monsters. The seneschal was paralyzed, staring at a Reaper that was currently dragging a guard out of the lift by his ankles. The guard was screaming, his fingers clawing at the metal floor until the Reaper's mandibles clamped shut around his throat, silencing him instantly. I didn't have time to be polite. I kicked Valeria's in the chest, hard enough to knock the wind out of him. "The red handle, you coward. Pull it." He fumbled for the emergency lever, his hands shaking so violently he nearly missed. With a desperate heave, he yanked it. The floor of the lift dropped another 3 inches before the secondary locks engaged, and the side maintenance hatch popped open. "Out! Now!" I grabbed the Empress by her waist and hoisted her through the hatch into the dark service tunnel. She didn't complain about the lack of ceremony. She landed in the oily water of the crawl space and immediately reached back to help the surviving guards. We were down to 4 men, 4 statues who were starting to realize that their gold armor was nothing more than a fancy coffin. We scrambled into the crawl space just as the elevator car was ripped completely out of its shaft by a massive obsidian claw. The sound of the metal being crushed sounded like a giant stepping on an aluminum can. "They're learning," I whispered, signaling for everyone to go quiet. I adjusted my HUD to thermal acoustic mode. They realized we aren't using energy weapons, so they're hunting by sound and vibration. Every step you take, you roll your foot. No heavy landings. No talking. We moved through the bowels of the ship like ghosts. The Empress was right behind me, her breathing shallow and fast. I could feel her eyes on the back of my neck, specifically on the tattoo. Even in the dark, she knew it was there. It was her only North Star in a world that had just turned upside down. "Voss," she breathed, so quiet it was barely a vibration in the air. "The Armory is behind the next bulkhead. But the biometric scanner requires a power pulse to read my DNA." I stopped dead. "A power pulse? You mean we have to turn the lights on?" "Only for a second," she pleaded. "The door is 10-inch reinforced Titan steel. It's the only place on this ship the Reapers can't chew through." I looked at the narrow corridor ahead. It was a kill zone. If we turned on the power, every Reaper within 5 decks would be on us in heartbeats. It was a gamble, the kind of gamble that usually ended with a shallow grave in the void. "All right," I said, checking my remaining magazines. I had 2 left for the sledgehammer and a handful of incendiary grenades. We do it fast. You touch the scanner, the door opens, everyone gets inside, and I blow the power coupling behind us. And what if the door doesn't open? Valeri's hissed from the back. "Then I saved the last bullet for myself," I said, my voice as cold as the space outside. "Because you do not want to see what they do to a highborn once they realize you're still full of warm blood." We reached the bulkhead. It was a massive, circular vault door, etched with the seal of the Solar Empire. Beside it, a small glass panel waited. "On my signal," I whispered. I braced my shoulder against the wall, aiming my pistol back the way we came. "Now!" The Empress slammed her hand onto the glass. For a split second, a bright, golden light flared as the scanner hummed to life. It was beautiful. It was also a dinner bell. Far down the hall, a collective, piercing shriek erupted. It sounded like 1,000 knives being sharpened at once. The floor began to vibrate as a wave of shadows surged toward us. Processing. The computer's calm, synthetic voice echoed through the hall. Biometrics confirmed. Welcome, Empress Lyra. The massive gears inside the door began to groan and turn. Slow. Too slow. Come on, I yelled, firing into the darkness. The muzzle flashes revealed the leading edge of the swarm, hundreds of the smaller, spindly reapers, their mouths agape, showing rows of needle teeth. The door finally clicked and began to slide sideways. Inside, get inside. I pushed the guards and Valyrians through the narrowing gap. The Empress hesitated, looking at me. Voss, get in here. I'm right behind you, I lied. I pulled an incendiary grenade, thumbed the pin, and waited. I needed to buy them enough time to seal that door from the inside. The first Reaper leaped, its claws inches from my face. I fired a round through its skull midair and threw the grenade. Seal it, Lyra. That's an order. As the wall of fire erupted, I saw the door slide shut, locking the Empress away in the safety of the armory. I was alone in the dark, with a wall of flame in front of me and a dying pistol in my hand. But I wasn't afraid. This was where the 13th Legion lived. This was our home. The wall of fire roared, a brilliant, hungry orange that momentarily blinded my HUD. The heat was intense, singing the hair on my arms, but it did its job. The lead swarm of Reapers shrieked as their oily carapaces ignited, turning them into screaming torches. For a few seconds, the corridor was a chaotic mess of fire and shadow, but I knew the flame wouldn't last. These things lived in the vacuum. They were used to the cold, and the heat was merely a temporary wall. I backed away from the sealed armory door, my eyes scanning the darkness for a secondary exit. I wasn't just a soldier. I was a void walker. We didn't believe in dead ends. Voss, Kaelen. I heard a muffled thud against the titan steel door behind me. It was the Empress. She was screaming my name, her fists pounding against the 10-inch thick metal. It was a strange sound, the ruler of the known universe, sounding like a terrified girl. Get away from the door, Lyra, I yelled back, not turning around. Find the weapon racks. Look for the crates marked Project Sunburst. Do it now. The fire began to die down, flickering into low blue embers. From the darkness beyond the smoke, the clicking started again. Faster this time. Angrier. They knew I was the one who had hurt them. To a Hive mind, a wound to one is a memory for all. I reached into my tactical belt and pulled out my last magazine. My hands were steady, despite the adrenaline dumping into my system. I slammed the mag into the sledgehammer and racked the slide. 7 rounds. 7 chances to remind these things why humanity was the only species that had ever successfully fought them to a standstill. A shadow detached itself from the ceiling. It was larger than the others, a warrior-class Reaper. It had 4 scythe-like arms and a head that was nothing but a vertical slit of pulsing violet light. It didn't rush in. It circled, its claws clicking against the metal grates. Come on then, I whispered, my finger tightening on the trigger. Let's see if you taste as bad as you look, it lunged. It was faster than anything I'd ever seen, a blur of obsidian and violet. I fired once, twice. The first round clipped its shoulder, spinning it around. The second caught it in the midsection, blowing a hole through its crystalline spine. But it didn't stop. It used its momentum to slam into me, its weight hitting me like a speeding hover truck. I flew backward, the air leaving my lungs in a sharp wheeze. My back hit the armory door with a metallic clang. Before I could recover, the creature was on me, its mandibles inches from my throat. I jammed the barrel of the sledgehammer into its mouth and pulled the trigger. Thoom! The creature's head vanished in a cloud of black mist. Its heavy, twitching body slumped on top of me, pinning me to the floor. I struggled to push the carcass off, but more shadows were emerging from the smoke. 3, 5, 10. I was out of ammo. My knife was in my hand, but against a dozen warriors, it was a toothpick. Suddenly, the massive gears of the armory door behind me began to grind again. No, stay inside. I roared, but it was too late. The door didn't slide open all the way, just a crack. A blinding beam of white light shot through the opening, a lance of pure, unadulterated energy that didn't just burn the Reapers. It disintegrated them. I looked up, shielding my eyes. Standing in the gap was Empress Lyra. She wasn't wearing her silk robes anymore. She had thrown on a heavy, oversized tactical vest from the Armory, and in her hands, she held a weapon that looked like a miniaturized sun. "I found the sunburst," she said, her voice shaking but her aim true. She fired again, a continuous stream of white-hot plasma that turned the corridor into a kill. The Reapers didn't even have time to shriek. They simply evaporated. She reached down, grabbed the collar of my vest, and hauled me backward into the Armory with a strength I didn't know she possessed. The doors slammed shut, the heavy bolts sliding into place with a final satisfying thud. I lay on the cold floor, gasping for air, looking up at the ceiling. The Armory was filled with ancient tech rows of kinetic rifles, canisters of nerve gas, and experimental suits that the Empire had deemed too barbaric for their civilized age. The Empress stood over me, the sunburst rifle still humming in her hands. Her face was smudged with soot, and her golden hair was a mess. She looked less like a goddess and more like a survivor. "You're bleeding," she said, nodding toward my shoulder where a Reaper claw had grazed me. "I've had worse," I grunted, sitting up. I looked at the rifle she was holding. "You know how to use that thing?" "I'm a quick learner," she replied. She looked at the tattoo on my back again, which was now partially covered by blood and grime. "Voss, in the archives here. I found a digital log. It was from the commander of the 13th Legion. My great-grandfather's personal seal was on the order to collapse the gate. I went still. And? He didn't do it to save the Empire," she whispered, her eyes filling with a sudden sharp clarity. "He did it because the 13th had found something out there. Something more dangerous than the Reapers. He was trying to keep you out, not just the monsters." I looked at her, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. "What did we find, Lyra?" Before she could answer, the entire ship shuddered violently. A sound like 1,000 gongs being struck at once echoed through the hull. The Reapers weren't trying to get through the door anymore. They were trying to break the ship in half. The floor beneath us buckled as if the ship had hit a brick wall at warp speed. I grabbed the edge of a weapon rack to keep from being tossed across the room. The Empress stumbled, her sunburst rifle clattering against the deck, but she managed to catch herself. The deep, rhythmic thrum of the ship's engines changed, shifting from a steady hum to a dying, stuttering whine. "The main reactor," I curse, hauling myself up. "They've stopped trying to chew through the hull. They're siphoning the core directly." Valerius was huddled in the corner, his face buried in his hands. "We're dead. If the reactor goes, the containment field collapses. We'll be vaporized before the Reapers even finish their meal." "Shut up, Valerius," Lyra snapped. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the flickering red emergency lights of the Armory. "You asked what the 13th found. The log. It called it the origin signal. It wasn't just a discovery, Voss. It was a beckoning. My ancestor didn't seal the gate to keep the Reapers out. He sealed it because the 13th Legion had started to change." I looked down at the tattoo on my arm, the black hole surrounded by the broken chain. For a second, the ink seemed to pulse, a dull ache throbbing in my bone marrow. I'd always thought it was just a mark of service, a brand of the forgotten. But as the ship's power failed and the holiness of the Aurelian Crown withered away, I felt a strange cold clarity washing over me. "We didn't change," I said, my voice sounding deeper, more resonant. "We adapted. The void isn't empty, Lyra. It's full of pressure. If you stay in it long enough, you don't just survive the dark. You become part of it." I turned to the weapon racks, ignoring the pain in my shoulder. I didn't reach for the sunburst or the kinetic rifles. I walked to the very back of the vault, to a crate that was locked with a manual, mechanical combination. It was covered in dust, untouched for generations. "What are you doing?" Valerius whimpered, peering over his knees. We need to get to the escape pods. The pods are gone, I said, my fingers flying over the tumblers. Left 32, right 15, left 9. The ship is being held in a gravitational lock. There's only one way out of this, and it involves going straight into the heart of that Hive ship. The crate hissed as the seal broke. Inside lay a suit of armor that looked nothing like the gilded chrome of the Imperial Guard. It was matte black, made of a reactive liquid metal alloy that seemed to swallow the light around it. There were no insignias, no decorations. Just a helmet with a single horizontal visor that glowed with a faint, ghostly violet. The Void-Wraith Mark IV, the pinnacle of the 13th Legion's heretical tech. That's forbiddance, Valeras gasped, his voice trembling. That suit uses Reaper essence for power. It's a death sentence. You'll lose your mind. I lost my mind the day your empire left me to rot in the Oort cloud, I growled. I stepped into the rig. The suit didn't just go on. It bonded. I felt the neural spikes interface with my spine, a jolt of ice water through my veins. My HUD didn't just show me the room. It showed me the ship's structural weaknesses, the heat signatures of the thousands of Reapers crawling through the vents, and the massive, pulsing heart of the enemy vessel attached to our hull. But more than that, I could feel them, the hive mind. It wasn't a roar, it was a whisper. A cold, hungry static that wanted to know why a piece of the dark was suddenly fighting back. I grabbed a heavy, serrated combat blade from the crate, a monofilament edge that could slice through starship plating. I looked at the Empress. She was watching me with a mix of awe and pure, unadulterated terror. "Voss," she whispered. "Your eyes. They're turning purple." "Don't look at my eyes, Lyra. Look at the door," I said, my voice now a dual tone of human grit and mechanical resonance. "I'm going to open a path to the reactor. You and the guards take the sunburst rifles. You follow 3 paces behind me. Anything that isn't us gets turned to ash. And if you stop being us?" she asked, her hand tightening on her rifle. I paused, the violet glow of my visor reflecting in her wide pupils. "Then you use that sunburst on me first." I slammed the manual override for the armory door. It didn't groan this time. It shrieked as the hydraulic pressure, boosted by my suit's interface, forced it open in a blur of motion. The corridor outside was packed. A literal wall of Reapers, hundreds of them, were piled up against the door, waiting. They lunged the moment the gap appeared. I didn't fire a gun. I didn't scream. I stepped forward and swung the blade in a wide horizontal arc. A wave of violet kinetic energy erupted from the suit. A void cleave that didn't just cut the monsters, it erased them from existence. The path was open. The hunt was on. The scream that tore from the throats of the Reapers wasn't sound. It was a psychic shockwave that shattered the remaining marble panels along the hallway. But I didn't flinch. Inside the Void-Wraith armor, I was a ghost in the machine. The world was no longer made of walls and floors. It was made of vectors and kill zones. "Move," I commanded, my voice echoing with a metallic rasp. I sprinted into the fray, a blur of matte black death. The Reapers threw themselves at me in a desperate carpet of claws and teeth. I didn't even slow down. I punched through the chest of a warrior-class drone, my gauntlet vibrating at a frequency that shattered its internal core, and used its collapsing body as a shield against a volley of jagged bone shards from the ceiling. Behind me, Empress Lyra was a revelation. She stepped into the corridor, the sunburst rifle braced against her shoulder. She didn't hesitate. She fired in rhythmic bursts, the white-hot plasma lances cauterizing the air. The 2 remaining guards followed her lead, their faces grim, finally fighting like soldiers instead of ceremonial ornaments. "The reactor is around the bend," Lyra shouted over the roar of the plasma fire. "But the bioscanners are offline. We'll have to blow the door." "No need," I replied. I reached the reinforced bulkhead leading to the engineering deck. It was a 3-ton slab of lead-lined steel designed to contain a nuclear meltdown. I didn't look for a keypad. I slammed my palms against the center of the door and let the suit drink from the ship's failing power grid. The violet glow of my visor flared to a blinding intensity. Crack! The steel didn't just bend, it curdled. The molecular bonds of the metal were shredded by the void energy, and the door imploded inward. We stepped into engineering, and the sight was enough to make the guards vomit. The massive, spherical reactor, the beating heart of the Aurelian Crown, was covered in a pulsating organic web. Thousands of glowing tendrils were bored into the glass, sucking the golden liquid light out of the core. At the center of the web sat something new. Something worse. A Reaper Queen. She was 15 feet tall, a spindly, translucent nightmare with a crown of floating obsidian shards. She wasn't just eating the power. She was weaving it into a gateway. The air above the reactor was warping, opening a hole into the between, the space where my people had been exiled. "She's calling the rest of the Hive," I whispered, the suit's HUD flashing red warnings. "If that gate opens, the Solar Empire is over. They'll pour through by the millions." The Queen turned her head. She had no eyes, just a vertical mouth that split her face in two. She didn't shriek. She spoke directly into our minds. "The traitor returns," the voice hissed, a cold slime in my brain. "The 13th was promised to the dark. Why do you wear the skin of the dead to protect the weak?" "Voss?" Lyra gasped, clutching her head in pain. "What is she saying?" "She's trying to negotiate," I said, my grip tightening on the monofilament blade. "She thinks I'm one of them." I stepped forward, but the Queen raised a clawed hand. The organic webbing around the room began to glow. From the shadows of the massive coolant tanks, dozens of stalkers, the elite, invisible variants of the Reapers, began to phase into reality. We were surrounded, pinned against the broken door with a god-tier predator in front of us. "Voss, the sunburst is overheating." Lyra yelled, the rifle in her hand hissing with steam. "I can't give you more than 2 more shots." "Save them," I said. I looked at the Queen, then at the tattoo on my arm, which was now glowing a bright, toxic violet through the gaps in my armor. "She wants the 13th? I'll give her the 13th. I reached for the emergency coolant release on my chest. If I cracked the suit's core, I'd be flooded with enough void energy to either level the deck or turn me into a monster. It was a one-way trip. "Lyra," I said, not looking back, "whatever happens next, remember that we were never the ones who left. We were the ones who waited." I slammed my fist into my chest plate. The seal broke, and the room was swallowed by a roar of violet light. The world didn't just turn violet, it turned inside out. The scream that ripped from my throat wasn't human anymore. It was the sound of a collapsing star. The Void-Wraith armor groaned as it absorbed the raw, unfiltered energy of the between, the liquid metal expanding and hardening into jagged crystalline plates. I felt my consciousness fraying at the edges, the memories of the 13th Legion, their cold, lonely deaths, and their burning resentment flooding into my mind. I wasn't just Kaelen Voss anymore. I was a vessel for 1,000 betrayed souls. The Reaper Queen recoiled, her crown of obsidian shards vibrating in a frantic, dissonant hum. She had expected a snack. She found a predator. The stalkers that had been closing in on us suddenly stopped, their invisible forms flickering and popping like short-circuiting lights as the sheer pressure of my presence warped the gravity around them. "Voss, stop!" I heard Lyra's voice, but it sounded like it was coming from the bottom of an ocean. "You're tearing the room apart." She was right. The marble floor was lifting in chunks, and the organic webbing on the reactor was disintegrating into ash. But I couldn't stop. The hunger of the suit was absolute. I looked at the Queen and saw not a god, but a parasite. "The dark does not belong to you," I snarled, the voice coming from every speaker in the room simultaneously. I moved. I didn't run. I displaced. One moment I was by the door, the next I was burying my hand into the Queen's translucent chest. Her ichor was boiling gold, the stolen energy of the ship's reactor. I felt it surging into my arm, feeding the suit, feeding the void. She shrieked a psychic wail that burst the glass of every monitor in the engineering deck. Her obsidian shards flew at me like shrapnel, burying themselves in my armor, but I didn't feel them. I twisted my blade, the monofilament edge vibrating at a frequency that began to unravel her molecular structure. "You are..." "The error," she hissed into my mind, her voice fading. "The 13th was." "The mistake. The mistake was leaving us alive," I retorted. With a final violent surge, I ripped her core out, a pulsing violet heart the size of a human head. The moment it left her body, the queen began to dissolve into a puddle of black, oily shadow. The hive mind connection snapped. All across the ship, the smaller reapers didn't just stop. They collapsed, their nervous systems fried by the feedback loop of their queen's death. But the danger wasn't over. The reactor was still unstable, and the origin signal gate above it was widening, fueled by the queen's dying energy. "The gate is still opening," Lyra yelled, running toward the console. She was stepping over the dissolving remains of the stalkers, her sunburst rifle held low. "Voss, the feedback is going to blow the whole deck. You have to drop the core." I stood there, clutching the queen's heart. The violet light was blinding now, and I could feel the suit trying to merge with my skin. The hunger was telling me to step into the gate. To go home. To lead the 13th back into the light and take what was ours. "Voss! Kaelen!" Lyra was in front of me now. She didn't have her weapon raised. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the cold, jagged metal of my gauntlet. "Look at me. Not the void. Look at me." I turned my head. The violet visor flickered. Through the haze of power and rage, I saw her. Not an empress, not a ruler of a corrupt empire, but a girl who had stayed to help a barbarian when she could have run for the pods. "You're not a ghost," she whispered. "You're a man. My protector." The violet light in my eyes dimmed, just enough for me to see my own reflection in her pupils. I saw the tattoo on my arm, the broken chain. It wasn't just a symbol of being trapped. It was a symbol of breaking free. "The gate needs a tether," I said, my voice cracking back into something human. "If I throw the core into the reactor, it'll reverse the polarity and suck the gate back into itself. But it'll take the ship's power with it. We'll be dead in the water. Then we'll be dead in the water together," Lyra said. I looked at the reactor. I looked at the gate. I took a breath, feeling the weight of the 13th Legion finally resting. "Close your eyes," I told her. I lunged toward the reactor core and slammed the Queen's heart into the golden liquid. The collision of the Queen's heart and the reactor core didn't cause an explosion. It caused a silence so absolute it felt like the universe had held its breath. Then, the laws of physics decided to scream. A vacuum pulse rippled outward, turning the golden liquid of the reactor a deep, bruised violet. The origin signal gate above us buckled, its edges fraying like burnt paper, before it was violently inverted. The suction was immense. I jammed my monofilament blade deep into the floor plating, grabbing Lyra's waist with my free hand as the air itself tried to escape into the collapsing rift. The remaining Reaper corpses, the obsidian shards, and even the loose marble from the hallway were pulled into the swirling vortex. With a final thunderous crack, the gates snapped shut. The lights died. The artificial gravity failed. The hum of the ship, a sound I hadn't realized was constant until it was gone, vanished. We were floating in the pitch-black heart of a dead titan. "Is it over?" Lyra's voice was a tiny, fragile thing in the dark. "The Reapers are gone," I said, my voice sounding hollow inside the helmet. My HUD was dead. The Void-Wraith suit was cold, the liquid metal losing its luster and becoming a heavy, rigid shell. The Hive ship outside should be drifting. Without a queen, they're just mindless husks. A small emergency chemical light snapped on. Valerius was holding it, his face a mask of sweat and grease. He looked at the wreckage of the engineering deck, then at me. The fear was still there, but it was replaced by something else. Calculation. "The reactor is cold," Valerius muttered, his voice regaining some of its oily arrogance. We have no life support. No long-range comms. We're in a graveyard, Empress. If the nearby patrol fleets don't find us, we'll freeze in the dark. Then we start walking, I said, my boots hitting the floor as the backup magnets in the solace kicked in. We get to the auxiliary bridge. There's a manual distress beacon there. I felt a sharp pain in my back. As the suit powered down, the neural spikes were withdrawing from my spine, and it felt like being flayed from the inside out. I slumped against a coolant tank, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Lyra was at my side in an instant. She helped me unlatch the helmet. When it came off, the air of the ship felt stale and metallic. She gasped when she saw my face. The veins around my eyes were still dark, a web of violet ink that hadn't faded. "You gave everything," she whispered, her hand brushing my cheek. "To save an empire that turned its back on you." "I didn't do it for the empire," I said, looking her in the eye. "I did it because someone had to show you that the dark doesn't have to be your enemy. You just have to be more dangerous than what's hiding in it." We spent the next hour crawling through the skeletal remains of the Aurelian Crown. It was a ghost ship now. The luxury was gone, the gold was scratched and bloodstained, and the silence was heavy. But as we reached the auxiliary bridge, I saw something through the reinforced glass. The stars. They weren't obscured by the obsidian Hive ship anymore. The massive enemy vessel had drifted away, its lights dark, looking like nothing more than a jagged asteroid. We had won. Valyris scrambled to the manual beacon, his fingers flying over the physical switches. "I have a signal. It's weak, but it's broadcasting. The Fifth Fleet is only 2 light years away. They'll be here in hours." He turned to look at us, a strange smile on his face. "We'll tell them a heroic tale, won't we, Your Majesty? How the Imperial Guard fought off the invaders. How the mercenary Voss played his part before succumbing to his unfortunate injuries." I felt the cold weight of a sidearm being leveled at my chest. It wasn't Valerius. It was the captain of the guard, the only one left. He was standing in the shadows, his ceremonial armor cracked, but his service pistol was very real. "The 13th Legion is a myth that needs to stay dead, Voss," the captain said, his voice trembling. "The people can't know the Empress was saved by a ghost. It undermines the throne. It undermines everything we stand for." I didn't move. I didn't have the strength to. I looked at Lyra. She stood between me and the gun, her back to me. "Captain," she said, her voice dropping to a temperature that would have frozen the sun. "If you fire that weapon, you will be killing the only person in this galaxy who knows how to stop what's coming next. Your Majesty, it's for the good of the realm." "I am the realm," Lyra roared. She stepped forward, the sunburst rifle, now just a heavy club of metal held at her side. "And this man is a hero of the Solar Empire. If you want to kill him, you'll have to go through me. And I promise you, I've learned more about killing in the last 3 hours than you've learned in a lifetime of parades." The captain hesitated. The silence stretched, thinner than the ship's remaining oxygen. The captain's finger twitched on the trigger. In the dim red emergency light of the auxiliary bridge, he looked less like a soldier and more like a man watching his entire world crumble. Behind him, Valerius stood paralyzed, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. "Lower the weapon, Captain," Lyra commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that didn't come from a crown, but from the fire she'd just walked through. "That is not an order from your Empress. That is an order from a survivor." For a heartbeat, I thought he'd do it, that he'd take the shot just to keep the status quo. But then, his shoulders slumped. The pistol lowered, clattering onto the deck plates. He couldn't do it. Not after seeing what I'd done to the Queen. Not after seeing the Empress stand in the line of fire for a low-born ghost. "Good choice," I muttered, sliding down the bulkhead to the floor. The adrenaline was completely gone now, leaving nothing but a hollow ache in the cold. We sat there in the dark, watching the distant flicker of the Fifth Fleet's jump drives, appearing on the horizon like a string of pearls. They were coming to save us, but the ship they were finding was no longer the one they knew. What happens now? Lyra asked, sitting on the floor beside me. She didn't care about the grease on her robes or the blood on her hands. She leaned her head against my shoulder, the weight of it grounded and real. Now the truth comes out, I said, staring at the stars. You can't hide the 13th anymore, Lyra. The gate is closed for now, but the Reapers were just the beginning. The origin signal is still out there. Your people need to stop building cathedrals and start building shields. She looked at the tattoo on my arm, tracing the broken chain with her thumb. I'm going to reform the legions, not as ornaments, but as defenders. And I want you to lead them, Kaelen. I let out a short, tired laugh. I'm a ghost, remember? Ghosts don't lead armies. They haunt the people who deserve it. Then haunt me, she whispered. Stay. Help me fix what my ancestors broke. I looked at her, and for the first time in 200 years, the cold in my chest, the cold of the void felt a little less biting. Maybe the 13th Legion didn't have to be a tragedy. Maybe it could be a foundation. As the rescue shuttles docked and the airlocks hissed open, the bridge was flooded with the bright, artificial light of the Imperial fleet. Soldiers in pristine, unscratched armor rushed in, weapons raised, looking for an enemy that was already dead. They found their Empress sitting on a dirty floor, protected by a man covered in black ink and violet scars. They tried to push me aside, to rescue her from the mercenary, but Lyra stood up and held out a hand, stopping them in their tracks. Treat him with the respect due to a prince of the Empire, she told the admiral in charge. Because without him, there wouldn't be an empire left to salute. I watched them carry her away toward the medical bay. She looked back once, her eyes meeting mine, a silent promise hanging in the air. I stayed on the bridge for a moment longer, watching the sun rise over the curve of a nearby moon. The solar empire was changing. The age of gold was over. The age of the void had begun, and as for me, I reached into my pocket and felt the cold, hard weight of a single obsidian shard I'd kept from the Queen's crown. Humanity was never meant to be the prey. We were the thing that waited in the dark, and we were finally coming home. That was a journey through the deepest reaches of the void. If you enjoyed this tale of the 13th Legion and the Empress's stand, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your fellow explorers. It really helps the channel grow and lets me bring more of these epic HFY stories to life. Don't forget to subscribe to HFY Soundscape and ring that notification bell so you never miss a drop from the frontier. Until next time, stay brave, stay human, and keep watching the stars.